Hello, loves. Welcome to Love, Truth, and Beauty. This is episode 360 and our 14th installment of my video series, Conversations with Men. And today I have with me my soul brother, totality therapy colleague, fellow Renaissance person, fellow singer-songwriter, a fellow artist, fellow painter, fellow extraordinary human being, asking those questions about, what is this reality and how are we navigating this reality? And should we change our ways? Paul Abramowitz, welcome. How are you, darling?
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. I'm well overall and very excited to be here and having this conversation.
I know. I'm so excited because you authored this beautiful book, SeXed. Yes, Hardwired by Nature, Evolving by Choice. And this is such an important book. And I know when I first heard about it, I was like, oh my God. And I went right for it. And most people are intimidated by the massiveness of a book like this. I'm not. I see books like this and I'm like, And then the cover is very, very compelling. So I got it right away. I had it shipped, drop shipped like that. And I was into it. And then, of course, I am a geek. So I like all the hormonal cascades. I like biochemistry. I like to know the mechanisms of what happens during our development, in utero in particular, because there's so many things going on. The development of the fetus, the infusion of the mother component, the mitochondrial DNA, all that kind of stuff, all the stuff with mama. And then, of course, there's the infusions of our biochemistry, the hormonal development. What inspired you to write such a book? Let's start there.
No, thank you for the wonderful introduction. And it's just to say, it is wonderful to share all of those other wonderful, magnificent gifts that life brings us in art and music and creativity with you, Maria. Thank you. So it feels very soul sister-ish, soul-ish. So I'll shorten the story a little bit. I was born into a family where my father was a gynecologist, obstetrician, and I later discovered a sex therapist. We were talking about genetics before we got onto the podcast. I came, it seems, with a long lineage of interest in medicine and biology. And I brought that into the intersection of the sex-humanity conversation. I went through my own puberty, the ordeals and the beauty of it, and some very wonderful relationships with women who were also interested in, what is this thing about intimacy and sex, etc. And then I got very interested in men's work and consciousness. What I discovered in leading and co-facilitating probably about 50 workshops was that while all of us were coming to find out how to work out what's working in our lives and what's not working anymore, and we learn emotional literacy and mission and purpose, etc., there was a significant disappeared conversation around how we become sexual. And it seemed to me, particularly for us as men, that this insignia of becoming sexed held a profound power over us. And that's been caricatured, historically and transculturally. But I wondered, where do we begin this inquiry? And if we did begin the inquiry, what would a codification of it or a mapping of it look like, so that I could help myself and assist other men and assist women who loved men to go beyond the veil of this term hardwired and hardwired for sex? Because it seems that our culture has gotten as far as that term, hardwired, and then we move into a rather comical calibration of male sexuality,
Yes.
or we talk about male sexuality as being toxic, for example.
Yes.
So,
or predatory.
Yes.
The predator aspect of it, especially
Yes.
with the war that's currently upon men.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. So, while I was ignited by this great inquiry into our consciousness as a species, I felt that something was not being spoken about with regards to our, what I call our intersection of our humanity and our sexuality as men and as women too. So I, as you know, you and I studied with Shakti. We had the great privilege and honor to sit at her feet and learn perhaps what you would call pure tantra, the Eastern wisdom of sex, sexuality, and humanity. And then I wanted to know, what is the West teaching? And so I went to study a dissertation through an institution in the States. And I took the topic of puberty for boys as a portal of inquiry. And that led me to understand that although the West speak in depth around male perpetration, erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, and the asexual man, for the rest of us, what I call the men in the middle of the bell curve, there isn't really a structured understanding of how our sexuality or becoming sexed impacts our persona, our executive functioning, our relationships.
Wow.
And so I took the research of that and I integrated the Eastern studies and my own experience as a practitioner in that, and created the book, which is really a map for men and women to unbundle and unknot, and for therapists too, by the way, a conversation which I think has been, for me, been waiting to happen for a very long time.
Wow. That is incredible. Were you daunted by this? I know while I read the book, one of the things that kept coming up for me was, how did you organize it in such a way where you didn't get overwhelmed? Or did you get overwhelmed? I'm sure you did. I mean, it's a rhetorical question almost. Because it's a incremental step by step, and the way you have it organized is really, really brilliant. And it operates in a way that it engages me. And I want to say, do not get intimidated by the ginormity of the book, because it's not like it goes by actually really, really fast, because you've got it organized where each chapter builds upon the other. And so there is this very flow-based evolution of how the material, the content is presented.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think overwhelm is a good term, and it's important also to recognize the research for the book started probably 20 years before 2010 in writing it. In fact, it probably started when I was 11, when I started reading Forum magazine, which I found in my father's study, which speaks to questions and answers by heterosexual couples around the predicaments that they were experiencing. And so I went into my own puberty holding not only the extreme focus and drive for sex on one paradigm, but also knowing that something is waiting for me, something's coming, and there's going to be challenges about it. How do I sort of head those off? Which of course is not possible, because you have to go into each one and deal with it. But I think I had that kind of a prism of of the observer of myself and my friends who were going through, exactly the same stuff. So the book started in 2010 when you and I began. Well, we started in 2012 with Shakti, but I began in 2010 with Shakti, and I started.
I did some earlier things.
You did work with her too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I started to write down thoughts around what I was discovering. I was also myself. I began an intense sort of 5-year journeyman or therapy, one-on-one with a wonderful therapist at that time. And as I began to write these thoughts and experiences down, and then experiences with clients in the therapy space, somehow the structure of the book began to develop in a trilogy. The trilogy of it was, what's the problem? What's the predicament? How did we get here? So this is part one. How do I identify the predicaments of male sexuality, primarily heterosexual male sexuality? How do I prepare a landing strip for the reader instead of having the reader feel like they're falling into a deluge of information and just cognitive dissonance? So that was part one. How did we get there? The predicament. How do I prepare a landing strip? And then part two became the biological aspect. The biological aspect meaning looking, as you said, at 7 weeks in utero. What is this thing that I refer to as our reproductive biological intelligence? Why does it need to be so intelligent that it in fact can hijack our brains, particularly the male brain, around getting sperm out? And then through my dissertation, I realized that there is a set of meta themes that happens to boys when we meet the urge. And I discovered 6 meta themes: the home environment, the meeting of the urge, secrecy, self-discipline and self-control, vulnerability overall, and shame and guilt. So I call those our emotional sexual hardwirings.
Yes.
These are more the soft wirings, because we can change those. The biological sexual hardwirings we can't really change unless we're taking testosterone, or we get reduced testosterone, which is another interesting thing that happens to us. And out of this second part of the trilogy, I arrived at a term called our design, our human sexual design, or how I find myself as a man. And then the third part of the trilogy became the solution, or the actioning towards a solution to move out of the adolescent male sex brain and into what I refer to as an activated man, a man who is holding in his awareness this this old way of being and this intention to move into a new way of being.
Right.
And so
that's
the playbook.
That's the choice bridge.
That's the choice bridge. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And I also must add, I had 2 remarkable editors that I spent 2 years each with.
Yeah. That is an incredible process,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So such a privilege to be able to construct a piece and work with the team, even the art team that worked on the book, and collating the maps and the pictures and everything was a wonderful project.
What was the most challenging aspect? I can imagine that having worked with editors and having been an editor myself,
yes,
when you're working with a writer and when you're the writer, there is I know I had to step back a few times where I was starting to get defensive and feeling a little misunderstood. And so I can imagine just based on the complexity and the necessity for clarity and organization, and how do you translate biology into language where it's going to land and not just go over people's heads or condescend, whatever. How did you approach those challenges as they came up?
I think with, as you say, with humility. I also held their opinions, Manuela and Clint's opinions, in the highest regard, because all authors are the first people to hear a message. And what is the point of that message if the message cannot be translated? So the gifts that they offered in the translation, which often went backwards and forwards many, many times. The central chapter 5, cognitive reproductivism, I saw between Manuela and myself, went backwards and forwards hundreds and hundreds of times. So recognizing more or less a 360 view of the book, with Clint's background and Manuela's background, I wanted to create a text that was digestible and absorbable, understandable, and not go there. And of course, it's difficult to know where to aim.
Yes.
It's difficult to know where to aim. And I did ask a friend of mine who's professor of sustainability at one of the local universities here, if one is writing a book like this, should one write a simple one first and then a more complex one? He said one should really have the complex one first and go to the more simple one afterwards. So I took that very seriously. That
is a very good point. Wow. Very astute. Because in the various, as you promote the book and as you do interviews and podcasts, you're going to be touching upon different levels of readership and audience who are either astute or have no earthly idea what you're talking about. And it has to be relatable, and it has to be translated, if you will, into different modes. So I get that. I get that completely.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
My hat is off to you. I mean, that is just so impressive to undertake this baby in many ways, activating your own inner feminine to receive the information, gestate it, hold it, and allow it to evolve in its own natural state. And also, I'm sure you went through the, what was the editing process like? I mean, just in terms of going through each section of the book and distilling the absolute kernels of platinum, so to speak.
Yeah, it was. I began the process in probably 2017, and both of the editors very kindly agreed to take on the job, because it was going to prove to be a very lengthy and very committed job, and a lot of contact, a lot of Skype time, because Manuela Viana was in London at the time, and Clint Gould, Dr. Gould, is in the States, so there was time differences with regards to all of that. Began the process with Manuela, and got a wonderful primary sense into what it's like for a woman to read this text, and so the text began to get pruned down at that point in time, and then in kind of perfect form, Clint then took over, and that was another 2 years. And then we began to pay a lot more attention to the distillation and the economy of word and meaning. And so privileged to have had him take me through the taskmaster trip of that, because a lot of our conversations really became ones of challenge for me, not in a bad way, in a very good way. He also has a PhD in human sexuality, and loves poetry and writing, and writes poetry. So
beautiful.
Yeah, it was a good team. It's a good team.
Wow. It's very similar to, and I've described this to folks asking about, what it's like to write a book, what it's like to go through the editing process, and to it's a conception to its completion and birthing. And it is very much, you are defending your doctoral thesis in many, many ways, and you're doing it in a public forum. I noticed that, like particularly in some of the reviews, I mean, people just dismissing it because of whatever, the length of the book, the title, whatever. And clearly, it always shocks me, the opinions of folks based on a cover or based on reading a few paragraphs, and they are going to render an opinion without reading something from cover to cover, or listening, viewing, watching an entire presentation. How has the book been received? How are you feeling about that?
I feel very pleased about it. When I started writing it, I thought, geez, perhaps a few people will be interested in reading this book. But what happens is, from the time that often one starts writing a book until it's published, the world moves in an interesting and strange direction.
Yes.
And so many things happened from, let's say, 2010 to 2021, including conversations around toxic masculinity, and its impact on the conversation's impact on young boys growing up, for example. And so what I then came to the conclusion was, instead of thinking, I wonder if a few people, 3 or 4, might be interested in writing this book, even though I feel I have to write it, it then became a little bit clearer that in likelihood, the book has got a trajectory of about 5 to 7 years, because that's the way conversations that haven't been had before tend to land on a culture that's looking at the cell phones and looking at funny cat videos. But there is
or quick fixes, encapsulate the book in a meme, one meme. I mean, yikes.
And to that point, Maria, the point that, for example, Wittgenstein made about language being important and the use of different words to illuminate our lives in different ways, there is, as many people are looking for quick memes, there are people who are either gone down that road or never went down that road, who really are seeking to embellish their lives. And so these are the people who've become quite interested in this conversation, because, and you and I have spoken before about the romantic industrial complex.
Yes.
The messages that we get around relationship, sexuality, intimacy. There's a lot of entertainment value in many of those conversations, but these folks who are looking to embellish and do the extraordinary are really willing, able, and intentional about having conversations that move us over into the transformational sphere of things. And in order to do that, as you know well, there is a certain degree of archaeology required. both of ourselves and an interest to do so in a curious way
Mm-hmm.
Towards our partners or our children or whoever is that we want to engage in a far more meaningful, sumptuous relationship.
Yes.
And the only way through that is through that. It doesn't come in a meme. It doesn't come
you have to
in a funny
dive
video.
in. And, quite often we burn in those fires of love, of truth, of beauty, of the ugly. The last bit, going into the guilt and the shame, which is, that is the end all, stop all. I'm not moving. I am staying where I am. I'm putting the blinders on and the cuffs are back on, And so we're all having these similar conversations to a varying degree. So I am so pleased that there is this very, very deep thinking, deep feeling, deeply embodied, deeply curious community that you're magnetizing to the book, because it is such an important conversation. And to have the totality of that conversation, because there are people that are going to poo-poo all of the biochemical stuff. They don't want to look at it, They don't want to look at that stuff, and they will dismiss it. Or the ones that are completely going to be immersed in, I call it the Church of Scientism, and willfully ignore any kind of shadow work that can possibly, we don't want to go there, possibly shift the affects of our biochemistry, because it does take consciousness. And I love the subtitle, Hardwired by Nature, Evolving by Choice. Brilliant.
Thank you.
There's a meme right there. It just nails it. It nails it. So well done. Well done.
Thank you, man. I appreciate. I'll add one more piece about big texts. I had the fortune to listen to the author of a book called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything, is a physicist who started having out-of-body experiences when he was 20 or 21, studied at the Monroe Institute of Out-of-Body Experiences. And so in his book, I heard him being interviewed in 2013, and pardon me for not remembering his name, but
I'm trying to remember his name as well.
Okay. He was in the book, as I understand, he's trying to introduce the hard scientists to the concept that not everything that we see, let me put it in a different way. Everything that we see is not everything that we can make our, mathematical equations on. In other words, there are other things. And he was apparently dying to have them begin to have this conversation that, in fact, we can only see 1/10 of 1/1,000,000th of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
Exactly.
So
the interviewer, this is now 11 years after the book was written, said to him, "So what did you do after you wrote the book?" He said, "I sent the book out to about 40 or 50 of the top physicists in the world." And the interviewer said, "And then what happened?" He said, "Well, I'm still waiting, for people to respond." And he said, "What did you learn?" He said, "Well, either people are very busy with their own stuff, or what you're suggesting contradicts their own stuff."
Yes.
And that makes it very, very awkward.
Yes.
And that was a breather for me, because then, of course, I stopped sending my books out to people, and I've begun to wait for the conversations to come towards me, in a sense, just like yours. And it's a wonderful organic way to go. But I think our species' big ship turns very, very slowly.
Yes. Yeah. And as it turns, there are corrections.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very much like shadow work, It doesn't, quite often, it doesn't go in the way that we expect it to do.
Yeah.
But what I'm finding more and more is that if I stay, within who I am and not look outside myself, I notice that I will actually magnetize similar conversations with a whole range of people.
Yes.
And what I love about that is that it shows the really the continuity of when you get sparked. That spark has a rippling effect in all directions.
Yeah.
And these conversations that we're having, that we're beginning to have, and will, every time somebody views your interviews, whether it's here or the other ones that you've done, people are going to be sparked. And that's how it goes. And the sparking, you know, it's not a one-off event, obviously.
Yeah.
So I like what you said, you know, the 5 to 7 year birthing rites. The announcement goes into the far corners of the universe. And wow. I mean, what a journey. What a journey you have been on. Was there at any point or points during this whole process of you know, conceptualizing the book, writing it, putting it together, going through it, where you just wanted to like just go, you know what, fuck it, I just can't do it, I can't do it, it's too hard? Did you ever get to that point?
I think there were times when I felt less enthusiastic about it. No doubt about that. However, the underbelly of it all seemed to be speaking to me in the fashion that I didn't really have a choice. That's kind of how it felt. I didn't have a choice. I had to report on what I'd experienced, the stories that I've heard, had the privilege of hearing in working with hundreds of men. And it felt like a responsibility in a way. So yes, I did meet what my beautiful partner Karina calls, I did meet my human being. And my human being was quite raucous at times with regards to the project at hand. But overall, meeting the enthusiasm along the way of conversations I would have with psychologists or other men about what I'm doing, and those things really helped me to keep going. And then the inner flame of this project, which felt like it was the dots of which were joined from a very young age.
Beautiful. How has the reception been with women? I'm curious.
So, as expected, the women who love men are the initial sort of fire starters in taking on the book. It seems to me that, and it's one of the points I make in terms of why this conversation hasn't happened yet, certainly amongst men, it seems to me that women are really interested to try and find out or figure out the deeper aspects of the heterosexual male. The heterosexual male, unless we bump into something that's painful or difficult, or relationship or personally, will tend to go on in same habitual format.
That's true.
The ones who won't are ones of us who have gone through some kind of a hero's journey and begun to grow our awareness through meditation or mindfulness, and then what we begin to realize is that we've bumped up our awareness up to here, and yet our sexual consciousness is somewhere down here, and so now we're asking the question, how do we raise the bar on that? How do we bring it into alignment? And if our woman is also up here, it would be an encouraging for us to try and up-level our own, what I call our sexual intimacy quotient, our ability to be intimate with our partner, and move across the spectrum we spoke about earlier, the entertainment transformation spectrum. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with entertainment, but it's good. It's good. It's kinder to ourselves if we have some languaging of what this transformational side looks like, and then we can move across and have a lot more fun and transformation with our partners and ourselves, obviously. So short answer is women have been interested, were the first ones interested, then along came men and therapists as well, actually.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I know one of the visions that I have for this, and forgive my projection, but I think this would be an excellent course. Like a complete coursework, body of work, a universities, as it were, simply because not just for men, but for men and women.
Yes.
Because there is so much confusion, and especially in the work that I do, you know, as you know, I work primarily with survivors of trafficking, and a lot of the trauma that these men and women and children and young people go through is this habituated projection of the most egregious, violent, unconscious sexuality, often drug overdose, drug-related, drug-induced, violent-induced, you know, the trauma-based mind control to get people to comply and to assume the position, so to speak, and this level of fragmented consciousness where, you know, when you're dealing with trauma-based mind control, you've got these traumas that fracture an individual into a gazillion pieces, each one of those having their own sentinels that will not allow for reintegration. So I've actually introduced the book to a couple of my survivors, and it's making a lot of sense because they've been so fragmented. There is a willingness to look at physiological, biochemical, hormonal components to understand the mechanism. So I think it's really cool that, you know, there are just so many inroads to coming upon the book, and so that's an important aspect. And of course, you know, I am mentioning a very I mean, that's a whole polarized spectrum right there. It's not the norm, but for those who have done enough work and enough trauma deactivation, de-armoring, where they're looking to really consider having up-leveled relationships, up-level their sexuality, and completely transform it. I think these are important conversations. It's an important resource to really understand, not just within your own selves, but to understand this other species of humanity, so to speak, where you know, the divide and conquer within the matrix, and as you say, the romantic industrialized complex, all of that. I mean, you know, so there is a barring of a lot of information that they would much rather keep humans asleep or unaware, victimized, or at least not have such information easily accessible.
Yes, and so, well, first of all, thank you for your kindness about suggesting the book as a course. That would be a tremendous project, and I think it is possible. and then also for taking the book into your work and passing it on to the trauma circles in your work. Thank you for that. I do.
So welcome.
Thank you. I do believe that there is and I use the word redemption, not as to excuse, but in many of the men that I've worked with who have had the shame and the guilt around actions, behaviors, thoughts, etc., discovering that there is a biological mechanism inside us as men, which is designed to create a drive towards sex and actioning towards sex, and all of the multitude of things that comes with the introduction of our male brain. Once we begin to feel this drive, all of the things that happen, there is what's been described by some as a redemptive process, which is like a lightening of the load in terms of self-judgment, and taking on a form of curiosity around, I'll say a few things. This concept of feeling puppeteered by the drive, first of all, becoming the driver of the drive instead of being driven by an unseen force, beginning to understand the difference between the concept, am I thinking sex or is sex thinking me, which is very much a kind of a meme that plays in our brains as men, certainly through puberty. There's this cognitive dissonance. And the arrival at a place of feeling like some of the shackles are removed through this understanding of what is my biological hardwiring to sex? What is my, what emotions have I acquired through trying to make sense of myself as a biologically sexual man? Those are all conversations that lead into more of a spiral understanding of self rather than a loop and mundane, same. So I also feel that there can be a redemptive place reached by the men and women that you work with who've been traumatized through sexuality, in having another narrative around the male sexual, another narrative. Of course, also very useful in understanding relationships that they further then go into, rather than only having, what they've experienced. So thank you for mentioning.
I agree with that. That is important. The other thing too, as I was reading it, I noticed, I know my own journey in terms of unraveling just the truth of my own sexual nature. That there were several times where it occurred to me, I do recall when I was younger and being, programmed a certain way. I mean, we won't get into details, but I did have a very masculine, aggressive nature. Where I was thinking, wow, okay, so is that my own mechanism hormonally? I mean, given that testosterone is a precursor to estrogen. So I started thinking about that and thinking, is that my own mechanism, or is that the mechanism that I have absorbed from the unconscious partners that I had had? Where when I was younger, I was very curious, and I was very, for lack of a better way to describe it, I'll just own it, I was very promiscuous. I didn't know any better. I mean, it was the sign of the times, the 70s, free love for all, etc. So I got over a lot of that very, very quickly. But at the same time, I have to admit that there was a certain level of taking on the unconscious masculine within, where I caught myself, just having these thoughts and these behaviors where I was like, whoa, what is happening here? This is not me. but yet there was the drive and this sort of automated compelling to do certain things that I caught myself and was able to, I mean, those were the inspirations to have me do some major shadow work early on, where, you know, I just noticed a energies that were not mine, that were very unbecoming to me, that were actual reflections of the masculine, the men that I had engaged sexually. So I think there's something to that.
I do agree with you. And it's interesting that you have a touchstone of that, because you have a sense perhaps of what it's like to live through puberty as a young boy, and then move into manhood.
Yes.
And so my understanding is somewhat changing in terms of the term toxic masculinity, which I'm not fond of that term.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I think we do need a term to express a certain form of hypersexuality, or the aspect of men's behavior, our behavior, that is out of hand. What is facilitated for me in my thinking is the coexistence of our behavior and our biology. And so the gifts that we get as men around risk-taking and hypersexuality and drive towards masturbation in puberty, and visualization and fantasization and all of those things, those gifts can tend towards somewhat of a delusional way of living in the world. And I like to think of it as a tuning fork, because while all of the masturbation and the visualization is happening for us, our brains are developing as young boys, and then our brains become pruned at 26. What we have used stays behind. What we haven't used gets pruned away. And so there are moments of delusion where the outside world needs to be correlated or synchronized with our internal brains. And I think this part of a conversation has been not really looked at very much with regards to the construction of our psyche as men. And so if we look at these biological changes that we have, which are created by our reproductive intelligence in order to get the sperm out, in essence, to the very predictable egg that will come once a month, and that we have certain behaviors that have been caricatured, etc. I like to think of the toxic behavior as more as like an intoxicated behavior. It's kind of a drunken, it's a drunkenness.
Yeah. Well, and this is part of another video series that I'm actually working on, is what I call the Gynocracy. And the Gynocracy is, it's specifically about women's superiority over humanity, and utilizing not just the biological power of reproducing and creating a being and holding that being within and birthing that being, but also controlling that being in terms of how it thinks, how it will behave. And of course, there are consequences to not that compliance, but moreover, the abuse of that power of birthing a child, creating a baby, birthing a child, and also the abuse that a lot of women will abuse their sexuality, abuse their beauty in order to manipulate a man. And there are the men that are no better for it. They don't understand the manipulation, and they're willing to kowtow and label themselves as toxic men when they're under really heavy spell casting of sexuality and the abuse of that feminine power. that is actually quite malignant. It's not popular. It's not making me the belle of the ball with a lot of women, because they won't come after me for this, but I have just seen way too much overlay of that toxic masculinity, the patriarchy, blah, 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 without really the exploration and addressing, well, how did this come to be? You know, the polarization of the patriarchy, matriarchy, what is in the background of that? And this is where archaeology comes in, our prehistory, all of that. And so anyways, it's a whole other conversation. But it is very much related to what your book is really bringing forth. And we need to pay attention to the influences, you know, the polarities of those influences in order to get the complete picture of what we are dealing with, so that we can, you know, really come together as men and women, masculine and feminine, and extricate ourselves from this war that we find ourselves in automatically, you know. Because I really see that war between the masculine and feminine, the war of the sexes, as promulgated by the powers that want to be, they are banking on that, which is why the conversations are needing to happen, and they will happen. But it is because it requires every one of us to have humility and to step back and not blame each other, not blame biology, not blame our mothers and our fathers and our lineages, although see the heavy responsibility that I think we women have. We are the gatekeepers to conscious presence on this planet, the feminine women. Sorry, sisters, I know you don't want to hear that, but that is a fact. Whether you like it or not.
I appreciate what you're saying, Maria, and I also appreciate that what you're inviting is a particular level of curiosity about one another. And were it to be that this culture of curiosity, instead of blame and shame, were to be something of the future, then I think much of our work as almost elders of this generation will have been somewhat successful. In fact, because again, it's another misunderstood conversation that's been happening for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and has led to leads to a lot of suffering.
Extreme suffering, and you know, the isolation that I'm hearing more and more from women, more and more from men, where you know, they're so fed up with the schism and the schism, the animosity, the abject hatred for one another, that they would rather be in this, you know, I call it this forced hermitage of no relationship whatsoever. And that for me, it's heartbreaking for me to hear.
It is heartbreaking, and it's a victory for the other side, as far as I can tell. And any curiosity that takes a man and a woman down a path of simply unbundling the narratives that we've learned and applying the notion of, let's say, building the airplane while we're flying it, instead of trying to know, you know, what's going to happen here, what will this turn out to be like, and a courage, a particular kind of courage in relationship. For me, that different ethos leads to a completely different way of being, and it's definitely not the fast food relationship way of being. It's a profoundly birthed and kind, generative, and sustainable way of being. the kind of which we don't really read about. But it's not impossible. It's not impossible. It is possible for men and women who are keen and curious to take the first step down that road. It is possible to go on this riding of the spiral and moving out of this, mundane loop.
Yes.
So I feel very hopeful.
Yeah,
actually.
me as well.
Yeah.
Me as well. And I'm looking at our time here. Wow, we're pushing an hour. How are you feeling, sweetheart?
I feel good. Thank you.
Yeah,
for
so
talking to you.
Well, let's close this out, because I know it's late for you, relatively speaking, in South Africa, and I so appreciate your time, and I so appreciate you taking this on. I mean, it really was it was ordained to you, my friend. This vast topic encapsulated in this beautiful book,
Thank you, Maria.
and I feel very privileged to know you and to have actually personally have met you, because there's so many people that I've not met or met briefly, and so I just feel so blessed. And Shakti, she's here with us, and cheering us on. And do you have any last words, and how people can find you? I'll have all your information in the show notes below.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Maria.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for your beautiful outro and our precious time together, and thank you for being a profound spokesperson on and light for so many people.
Thank you.
And for your courageous work. You work at the rock face of shadow.
Yes.
Shadow and human sexuality and pain and suffering, and how enormous your energy is to be able to contain yourself and hold other people safely in that space. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. You're so
welcome.
Thank
you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me.
We'll have more conversations, I'm sure, because I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah, we are. So the book, as you said, you'll put everything in the show notes. The book is on Amazon. The website for the book and information about my coaching is also on the website for the book. And I look forward to many more conversations with you, my friend. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. All right, my loves, that is it for today. And so be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves. And until next time, here is to Love, Truth, and Beauty. Mwah! Bye-bye for now.